Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this morning's webinar. As Kira said, on the theme of how to improve your contact center Net Promoter Score. My name's Simon Thorpe. I'm one of the directors of Bright, and we are a customer insight consultancy business and have worked with a broad breadth of organizations across the UK and across the globe, particularly focused on helping them improve their customer experience. Now, over the course of the next 40 minutes or so, we're going to talk about the different ways and sharing some insights and some tips and some learnings and observations that we've come across on our journey to help organizations design, monitor, manage, and fundamentally improve their contact center Net Promoter Score. Now, before we get going, it's very clear to say that the Net Promoter Score has become a crucial measure for a lot of organizations. And I think we're delighted to say that over the past 3 or 4 years, I've certainly seen organizations finally wake up to the true value of providing a fantastic customer experience. In fact, those organizations that are providing great service are truly using that as a competitive difference. And I think share analysts and chief execs and the board have finally realized that the Net Promoter Score, that measurement that many companies have adopted, is one that can truly trace and understand business success when it comes to customer service itself. And even as recently as this week, the national newspapers have published tables and league tables talking about how consumers would likely recommend their banks. So we're seeing very clearly that the Net Promoter Score is starting to filter into the consciousness of the consumer of today. But it's not just the financial services that are looking at Net Promoter as an important measure of success. It's also regulators. We're seeing organizations like Ofwat starting to adopt Net Promoter as part of some of their measurement process of the water industry. So it's certainly become a crucial measure and something that organizations should start to focus on. Now, given the contact center is predominant and one of the key touch points for a lot of organizations, I think that's probably the reason why at Bright we so regularly get asked, what are the quickest ways of trying to find quick wins and improvements? And what are the things that you'd recommend that would give us a way of optimizing what we're doing already? And that's really what I'm going to focus on today, sharing some of those top tips and suggestions that we've come across along our journey. Now, very quickly, just to contextualize a little bit about Bright, and I promise I'm not going to labor this too much, but over our 20 years, we have conducted thousands upon thousands of operational benchmarking reviews of customer service operations and contact centers. We've also conducted millions of customer surveys and employee engagement surveys for a real diverse range of brands across the UK and the globe. And although our projects vary from time to time, the Net Promoter theme and improving customer experience is very core to everything that we do. And I think it's safe to say we're very proud of some of the journeys that we've taken our clients on. Some start with a very low level, and some are starting at a high level and looking for some marginal gains. And I'm going to try and draw on that experience over the course of the next 40 minutes to really bring that to life. But at this juncture, it's probably worth mentioning that as much as we've framed this whole webinar around improving the Net Promoter Score, it is just a score. So it's crucial with any kind of customer feedback program or voice of customer program to start evaluating and quantifying the value of what that improvement looks like in terms of pounds and pence value back to the business. Truly understanding whether an improvement in Net Promoter by any kind of level of point increase, what will that do to your customer loyalty, repeat business, and their likelihood to stay an advocate of your brand. And without that quantification and without looking at that analysis, we very quickly fall in the trap of just chasing a number for chasing its sake. But nevertheless, as I've said before, that NPS measure is an easy and readily adopted number that the board and the city are grabbing hold of. So it's important to understand how to get there in its first place. Now, a lot of organizations come to me and say, Simon, you work with a diverse range of brands, but what are the common themes and the commonalities that you see with some of those top performers? It's quite difficult to put that into any great detail, but I think there's one common theme that stands out above all else, and that is that the very top performers are those that understand the links between operational performance, employee engagement, and customer feedback. So let me try and explain what I mean here. In a contact center, when I'm talking operational performance, I'm talking about how a contact center is structured, from the technology to the people, to the KPIs, to the measurement process, the targets, and so on. From an employee engagement point of view, I'm talking about how engaged and our people, our frontline advisors, have the right tools and the right support and training and the will to be able to provide great service. And from kind of a customer feedback point of view, I'm talking about, are we tracking and measuring feedback that will give us meaningful insight that will enable us to drive change? Now, the very top performers, the top brands, are those that don't just measure these three things in isolation. They measure them collectively and holistically, and they understand the levers to pull between one another, and they understand how these three things impact on each other. And those top performers are usually the ones that have embraced that kind of position, and are usually the ones that see the quickest material gains, both in their net promoter and from a business sense. And as you can see on the right-hand side, those that have a strong view of these three data sets and can drive them and use that intelligence to drive change see the quickest improvement. And it's certainly within the realms of the possible to start seeing a 20, 30, even 40 point NPS improvement in as little as a few months. Now, let's start with stage one of our recommendation on our top tips. And I'm going to focus a little bit around building the foundations. So a lot of people come to us and ask, we want Net Promoter to become our primary measure of customer experience success within our contact center, or we already have that. But fundamentally, we need to be able to measure it and drive it and analyze it to be able to create any kind of meaningful insight. And they ask us, what are the key components, the building blocks that you would suggest to put into your customer feedback program that will allow you to successfully measure and drive an NPS score? And there's 6 things that we usually recommend. The first of which is making surveys accountable. I think it's very clear that in today's society, feedback technology and solutions are readily available, but they're no longer a nice to have. They are a business imperative. And one of the things that we strongly recommend when eliciting feedback from customers is to make that insight available to different functions within your organization. So if we're talking in a contact center scenario, the ideal is to be able to collect feedback and be able to dissect that and break it down to an agent, to a team manager, to a department, to a function, to a site level, maybe even a channel level, maybe even a brand level. Without being able to make the surveys accountable, it's almost impossible to drive change, because we need to enable our people to take some ownership, either developing their own capabilities or doing root cause analysis on what are the common problems and challenges that customers are facing. So accountability is the first one. Second one is surveying customers in real time. So the real time element is important for 2 reasons. One, wherever possible, we should try and collect feedback after the moment in time. So in a contact center environment, that might be after a phone call has taken place, or it might be after a web chat conversation. It's important to ask for feedback after that moment in time as quickly as possible. One, so the customer doesn't forget that interaction or blur it or muddle it with an interaction they may have had with a different brand. But more importantly, so that that feedback can be analysed and actioned before it escalates into perhaps a complaint or a particular challenge or issue that may be faced by other customers. So by surveying in real time, it gives you the opportunity to get ahead of problems before they escalate. Third recommendation is to look at automation. I regularly go to conferences and meet different brands and different organizations, and I'm surprised at some of the phenomenal net promoter scores that I see within the market today. But when we look under the bonnet and look at that in a bit more detail, I often find that those net promoter scores have been collected based on cherry-picked and agent-chosen surveys. Now, obviously, that will give us a level of insight, but it'll only give us so much. For true successful voice of customer programs, we need to remove the people element automatically. If I'm an agent and a conversation with a customer hasn't gone as well as I would have hoped, it's very unlikely I'm going to try and offer a survey for fear of getting in trouble or exposing myself to something that may lead to some kind of repercussion. Automation will allow organizations to get an absolutely true picture of what the net promoter score actually is and fundamentally help them drive it. Next recommendation is finding the links. I've mentioned this on the previous slide, but it's absolutely crucial to be measuring the customer sentiment and the customer feedback in parallel with some of the operational targets and data that you may be already measuring. What is the voice of the customer telling you? And can that be used to inform how you structure your business, the types of channels you offer, the targets and the behaviors you're driving across your workforce? Without placing the voice of customer into that decision making, it makes it very difficult to ascertain what kind of strategic objectives you should set. Share the insight. This is absolutely crucial. A lot of contact centers will be asking for feedback and be collecting really detailed insight after customer touch points. But one thing that I'm not seeing as happening as much as I think it should is that valuable gold being shared across the organization. Let's face it, a lot of failure demand and a lot of the cause of customer dissatisfaction isn't caused by the contact center. It's caused by other departments not doing what they're meant to be doing. So if the contact center can quantify and share that intelligence with other departments, it's a really valuable resource to try and improve the entire customer journey. And it also could have real impetus and impact on things like sales and marketing campaigns, web development, product development, and so on. And finally, and I think most importantly, take action quickly. I think we have become a culture of being very good at asking for feedback and surveying customers, but very rarely am I seeing organizations take action quickly. I did a straw poll at a conference not too long ago where I asked everyone to raise their hand and asked everyone whether they had filled out or completed or responded to a customer survey. And as you'd expect, the vast majority put their hands up. I asked them again whether anyone within that audience had received either a callback or some kind of acknowledgement or recompense for the feedback they'd been given. And nearly everyone put their hands down. So that suggests to me that we have become a listening culture rather than an action culture. And coming back to my previous point about Net Promoter, we have to be driving change and we have to be creating trust and creating engagement with customers that if they give us their feedback and are willing to share how we could do things better, we have to be able to go back to them and share what we're doing about it. Or very quickly, surveys will stop having any kind of level of response and will kill that part of the process. It's also, the taking action quickly has been proven to be one of the #1 ways of turning a detractor to a promoter. I think customers get the fact that things don't always go brilliantly all of the time. But if businesses and brands are willing to take that on the chin and say, look, things didn't go well this time, but we're doing our best to put it right, and could we talk to you about how we could have done things better, that's far more likely to turn a consumer to be a really positive advocate. So those are the foundations that I usually recommend. And for those of you that already have a program in place, I'd urge you to have a look and see whether some of these fundamentals are already embedded in what you're doing. If you're starting on that journey now, I would, again, maybe suggest having a look at how this could be included in that program that you're planning. Second thing to think about is identifying what actually drives your Net Promoter Score. I'm seeing a trend towards a number of organizations using a single survey question of, would you recommend our brand or this service to friends and family? And I think they're using that single question largely in fear of asking for too much information, turning a customer off because they don't want service to be long, and so on. And I totally get that principle. The problem, though, with that approach is just asking for a single piece of feedback won't give you the clear indication of what's driving that Net Promoter Score. Is it a people element? Is it a process element? Is it a procedure element, and so on? So our recommendation is absolutely keep surveys short, sweet, to the point, make sure they're absolutely tailored to the interaction. But it's absolutely fine to ask 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 questions that will help you uncover why a customer has scored you in that way. Let me share an example. So we surveyed and we looked at 170,000 pieces of data to get to this piece of insight. And what we found was there was a straight line correlation between customer effort, staff engagement, and agent knowledge, and the Net Promoter Score. So what I mean by this is that if a customer was to score low for customer effort, they would more than likely score as a detractor for the Net Promoter Score. Exactly the same from an agent engagement and knowledge point of view. And conversely, if they were delighted with how easy it was to do business with him and the knowledge and engagement of the agent, they're more likely to be a promoter. That completely makes sense. But unless we're asking these types of questions, it's very difficult to unpick where our effort should be. Is it an agent knowledge issue? Is it because the agent didn't sound particularly warm, friendly, or took ownership? Or is it that there is some fundamental problems with perhaps how quickly you got through the resolution or procedure that's halted you having a satisfactory interaction? So identifying what actually drives your NPS is a first crucial step to be able to improve it. Third stage is starting to look at the targets that you might be setting. Now, I totally get, and I'm very welcoming to the fact that the board and chief execs are really using NPS as a big business success measure. And what I'm seeing in a lot of organizations is because that NPS is so important and is a business imperative built across the organization, targets are then following suit. So targets are set both at a departmental level, at a team level, and even at an agent level. Now, the problem I have with that is twofold. One, agents, in my experience, very rarely have a true understanding of what Net Promoter Score is and what can drive it. But if they do, they will very quickly cotton on to the fact that there's lots of factors that will go into a customer's propensity to score as a promoter, passive or detractor, that is out of the span of control of that agent. So if they realize that, which they inevitably will, and they're being targeted on NPS, they will start challenging it and potentially start becoming demotivated because they can't control it. So drawing on the previous slide, our recommendation at Bright is starting to set targets that are within the controls of these different departmental individuals that will fundamentally result in a positive improving Net Promoter Score. Agents can control things like knowledge, professionalism, and ownership, and they can be trained, and they can be coached, and they can be monitored on them. And at the same time, business control people could be looking at things like effort and resolution and drivers. If you can have these two separate groups working on owning and developing their own capabilities and driving productivity and performance forward in these areas, you will absolutely see your Net Promoter Score start to improve. Stage 4, focus where it matters most. I think it's a fair assumption to say that a lot of contact centers tend to measure things and target their contact center around metrics and KPIs that are either readily available, easy to come by, or that are set out as legacy, with very little thought for the impact of what that might do, or whether a customer actually needs that level in the first place. So let me give you an example here. 80-20, so 80% of calls answered within 20 seconds, probably one of the most readily available KPIs that a lot of contact centers, particularly in the UK, will measure. Now, I totally understand why it's there. A lot of organizations will use that for resource planning, and they will use it to as a measurement of success that they will share with the wider business. But very few have genuinely asked their customer groups whether that is an imperative that will drive delight. I think it's pretty clear that yes, if you get through to speak to an individual very quickly, that is something that would be satisfactory and something that people would appreciate. But if you get through and speak to someone very quickly, and then the service experience from the agent or advisor you're speaking to is terrible, that's the thing that you're going to remember, and that's the thing that will stay with you for long term. And actually, if you look at the stats, we at Bright do thousands of benchmarking reviews, and we found that, in fact, 80% of the UK contact centre base are actually setting this 80-20 rule, but not getting anywhere near that target. In fact, only 20% are meeting that objective. But what's more, when we've analysed and worked with hundreds of different brands, we found that the speed of answer, as much as it is important, there is a breaking point before a customer starts to see that as a negative. So our recommendation is to look at this through a customer lens, work out what the breaking point is. From our point of view, 120 seconds, as long as the call is answered within that period of time, the customer will not subsequently score any kind of negativity around net promoter or customer satisfaction. And just imagine if all of that effort that's going into answering the call or answering the interaction at a speedy pace could be reinvested into things like knowledge and performance improvement and coaching. Just imagine the impact that would have on the overall customer satisfaction and subsequent net promoter score. Stage 5 really embodies employee engagement. I think we're all very clear within a contact center environment what a challenging environment it really is, and it's only getting more difficult. We're asking our agents to deal with more and more complex queries as self-service and automation becomes available. So we know it's a tough job. But very few organizations, in my experience, are measuring employee engagement directed at the contact center. They will inevitably have an annual or biannual HR survey that looks at employee well-being, employee satisfaction, but it really, in my experience, is very rarely targeted on the factors that will allow an agent to provide great customer experience. So it won't look at things like training, coaching, support, technology, whether people are being incentivized to deliver great service and so on. So our recommendation is to, wherever possible, try and wrestle that away from HR or run things in a complementary way that will allow you to take the temperature and understand the level of engagement across the contact center floor. And the reason we recommend this is that we have proven there is a straight line, almost one-to-one ratio correlation between employee net promoter score and customer net promoter score. So what I mean by this is that if an agent scores on an employee engagement survey as a promoter, so they would actively promote the brand as a place to work to friends and family. That will subsequently correlate through to customers scoring positively. So there's a real ratio there. So if contact centers can start driving their employee engagement and using these correlating links to see what impact that's having on the Net Promoter Score, hopefully that will support the argument for better investments, more support, and more direct impacts around employee engagement type programs that you might already be running. And actually, if we dig into this in a bit more detail, we found that there's a huge amount of potential. So if we look at the passive employees, and this is from thousands of pieces of research, we found that it's the passive employees that presents the biggest opportunity. And I know certainly from my experience of managing contact centers that we tend to focus on the very engaged and the very disengaged, and often the people within the middle are the forgotten people. But actually, we proved that if we could turn just half of our passive employees into promoters, that would correlate through to a potential of around a 15-point increase in customer net promoter. Now, I would imagine that if we could take that kind of statistic back to our board and say, look, if we could have the opportunity to invest more and measure and continually to monitor and manage our employee engagement, I could deliver a 15-point improvement in my customer net promoter score, I'm pretty sure the board is going to start listening and paying attention. Stage 6. Now this is crucial. We've talked a little bit about voice surveys so far, but exactly the same principle. If we're asking for feedback across all of the different touch points and all of the different ways that we're interacting with customers, one of the most important things to do is invite customers to leave feedback in their own words. Asking for scores is hugely important and useful, but it's the context, it's the sentiment, it's the real value that you can pull out of the verbatim comments that really is the gold. And often within that feedback, you'll have multiple themes. Classic example might be, I spoke to this agent, they were fabulous. This is the third time I've called because I've been trying to go online to order something and it's still not arrived. There's multiple themes there within that feedback that needs to be shared with different individuals and teams around the business. Now, there's lots of ways of analyzing these verbatim comments. I know lots of businesses struggle with this because it takes time, but there are systems available that allow you to quickly analyze both the sentiments and the themes and the topics that customers are continually discussing. And then being able to link that with the keywords and phrases that might be associated with promoters and those that might be associated with detractors really gives you some valuable insight to start analyzing and digging into. Now, as I touched on earlier on in the presentation, we know contact centers are often not the cause of customer dissatisfaction or customer complaints, but we need to help contact centers be able to quantify that cost of failure. And ideally, by doing something like you can see on the screen now, being able to share the top 10 gripes or issues or challenges this week with the board or the chief exec, that will help he or she crack the whip with those different departmental functions and say, look, these are the things that are upsetting our customers. This is what's driving a negative net promoter score. You need to get these things organized because not only are you driving avoidable contact into the contact center, which is costing us a lot of money, you're also potentially damaging our brand and the loyalty of our customer group. So I would urge everyone to really think about that verbatim piece and how to use that and how to create a feedback loop that shares intelligence around the business. And finding net promoter drivers outside of the contact center can be very quickly analyzed and quantified to prove a business case. So this is an example. Often in my experience, up to 20% of unwanted calls into a contact center can come from a customer's inability to be able to solve a query online, whether it being through the FAQs or looking for some basic information. So the first thing they do is they pick up the phone and they call the contact center. Wouldn't it be fantastic if we could run a survey after those interactions and find the answer to this question? Before calling us, did you try and solve your query online? This is such a basic and simple thing. But as you can see on the left-hand side, if you could quantify that and understand and use that intelligence to improve your web self-service capabilities, 5% more solved online queries in a 1,000-seat contact center would potentially provide in the region of around £7 million worth of saving. Now, again, not every organization has 1,000 agents, but in terms of the mathematics and be able to quantify that need for change, that is a very easy argument to take back to the board. Stage 7 really ties into what I was talking about before, creating a closed loop process. So we've asked for customer feedback. We now need to do something with it. We can't just simply be a listening port and just taking that feedback and not taking any action. One, because it's a waste of money and a waste of time and a waste of energy. But two, very quickly, our customers will stop giving us feedback and they will stop trusting our brand. So it's important to have a closed loop process. And I appreciate that this will take time and energy. But the best cases of this are, if a customer leaves negative feedback, some kind of an alert mechanism will alert someone within the organization to ideally respond to that individual and say, look, things didn't go as well as we would have hoped. How could we put things right? Now, granted, that is a resource element. That's something that has to be closely considered from a business priority point of view. But I'm absolutely convinced that if a brand contacted me after I gave negative feedback and really took the time and effort to put things right, I would scream from the hills on how fantastic that overall experience had been. But that mechanism needs to be accountable and it needs to be reviewed. So what I'm showing you here is a process, essentially. So a customer leaves negative feedback. Ideally, two things need to happen. That information needs to be captured. Some kind of a process needs to be taken where the customer is contacted, but also ideally that departmental function that maybe has had an impact on that negative feedback is also alerted. So for example, in a contact center, if all of a sudden we're getting lots of traffic because something's gone wrong on a website, ideally we want that web team to be told straight away. We can also use this for performance improvements, coaching, creating more meaningful one-to-one interactions, because we can start embedding this kind of feedback process into training and development of our people. So that closed loop process is absolutely paramount to help improve that Net Promoter Score. And stage 8 is really coming full circle and talking about the correlating links. And I touched on this beforehand about how important it is and how some of the best brands are looking at data collectively rather than in isolation. I think this is a good example that I'm showing on the screen at the moment. So at the bottom here, I've got customer satisfaction. The same could be played out for Net Promoter or agent knowledge or personalization. So that's a customer feedback type score. And I'm correlating that with a productivity measure. So the number of contacts handled per day by my team, for argument's sake. So very quickly, I can start pinpointing who are my top performers, those that are both effective, efficient, and when they speak to customers, they provide great service. Who are the outliers that need some direct and immediate support from our coaches and our team managers? And who are the real outliers that are neither productive or particularly good when speaking to customers? And we can make decisions on that kind of view straight away. Again, we can quantify the value of exercises like this. And the exact same principle could be adopted in a number of different ways. We could evaluate things like number of sales versus Net Promoter and customer satisfaction. Are our salespeople, our contact center salespeople, selling in a way that will result in long-term advocacy and loyalty of our customers, or they are just burning and churning through to get that deal? Is our quality assessment, our internal quality process, is that in line with what our customer feedback is telling us? Because if it isn't, we may be scoring our internal quality measures too harshly, or we may not be looking at it in the level of depth and detail that our customers require. So hopefully this brings to life the true value of finding correlating links and how important it is, not only to put a customer lens on business decision making, but also to make sure that you're setting the right targets and fundamentally driving the right behaviors in your workforce. So those are the key steps that I usually recommend organizations think about when they're either evaluating the current Net Promoter programs or the Voice of Customer programs, or embarking on building a customer feedback initiative. We always get asked throughout our work a couple of key pieces. The first of which is, how do you avoid survey fatigue? And let me tackle that first, because we are living in a world of being surveyed almost at every point in our daily lives. It's absolutely imperative when building surveys to think, put yourself in the customer's shoes. So the usual adages are absolutely true. It needs to be quick, it needs to be direct, it needs to be easy for the customer to digest. I'd really spend some time thinking about the survey questions and how they're phrased and introduced, giving ownership to customers in terms of how long it's going to take out of their day to fill out, and so on, because all of those nuances have a big impact on response level. But the number one reason why customers will stop getting survey fatigue and stop giving feedback is if they believe that nothing's ever happening with it. It's exactly the same reason why people are failing to go out and vote in the general elections, because they don't feel that their voice carries any weight and they don't think any change will happen. So if you can evidence change, however small that might be, through you said we did, maybe through newsletters, maybe through pieces on the website, that will build up that trust to help you avoid that survey fatigue. From a practical point of view, we absolutely recommend channel matching. We've been talking really today around transactional or moment-in-time type surveys. If you're adopting a relationship type survey approach where you're capturing feedback at the end of a customer journey, then that might slightly differ. Our usual recommendation is, wherever possible, try and capture a combination of both, moment in time and at the end of the journey, and that will give you the clearest picture of what's gone on. Channel matching is key, so if a customer's emailed you, try and use an email survey. If it's a voice survey, our recommendation is always to use an automated phone survey. We see that trumps SMS by almost 20% in terms of response level, and has a far greater propensity to customers leaving a verbatim comment. I think that stacks up really. Am I more likely to type in feedback on my phone or say it over a phone conversation? And we found that capturing those sound files and be able to play those back to teams and individuals and at board level can be hugely powerful, because you can really hear the emotion in a customer's voice. So just to finish with, I just wanted to share a couple of examples of how some of these approaches have been adopted. We do have these case studies in depth on the Bright Index website, and feel free to get in touch if you'd like these sent directly. But a couple of examples here. The first of which is with the global travel business TUI. They were very classic in terms of their feedback programs. They had no ability to capture feedback in real time. The feedback wasn't accountable. And it would often take a long period of time before any kind of meaningful insight was available that they could use to then drive better coaching interactions, develop knowledge of their people, develop processes, and so on. So a lot of what I'm talking about here were things that they adopted. Net Promoter was absolutely paramount in the respects that was a core business measure. And they were actually aiming to improve Net Promoter by 5 points over the course of a 6-month trial that we did together. By adopting a lot of the things that we've been talking about, they were able to improve the Net Promoter by nearly 40 points in as little as, I think it was 7 months all told. Now that is a huge increase, and they were able to do the correlating impacts of what that meant in terms of increased spend and reduction in cost and so on, and it materialized in millions of pounds of business value. But they were also able to pinpoint key elements from things like the verbatim. They use a combination of in-house contact center functions and some outsourced relationships, and they found through analysing the verbatim that on a few occasions there was a language barrier. Those little nuances that they were able to pull out of the comments that were left from customers were exactly to this point where they were able to get ahead of those problems, put them right, and very quickly they saw that eradicated from the customer comments going forward. So a really progressive, great example of adopting this approach to see real material gains and improvements in a very quick amount of time. The other example I wanted to share is with the organisation Which. This particular example is Which Mortgage Advisors. Bright works with a number of parts of the Which business. They have a phenomenal reputation, as you'd expect, from a customer experience point of view. And I thought this was a useful example because it's not always the businesses with some of the lower scores that can see the biggest gains. It can also be organizations looking at marginal gains, analyzing and continually understanding data to see performance improvement. So this particular example was talking about the kind of mortgage application process, and they broke this piece down into an initial call, a recommendation, and the completion of the mortgage application process. And doing exactly what we've been talking about, analysing and collecting feedback at those different points in the customer journey, they were able to quickly find some of the niggles, and they were only niggles, that were maybe causing a customer to not necessarily be a promoter. And it actually came down to the final step of the process. There was a 48-hour period between a mortgage completion and handing over to the administrator. And by making and analysing the feedback, they were able to make some very small tweaks and changes to that part of the journey, which materialised in an increase in 19 points in their Net Promoter as that part of that piece of the customer interaction. Huge increase just from listening to what customers were saying and changing that model and slightly adopting a different approach, and really had a very impressive and impactful impact on the Net Promoter. And I'm sure we'll all agree, an 84 Net Promoter score is absolutely market leading in the UK, and they are a fantastic brand, and I'd urge everyone to have a look at that case study. That really concludes the key parts of the presentation that I wanted to take you through. We're just bang on time at the moment, 11:45. I've purposely tried to keep this to that time frame so that we could allow for some questions. I do hope that this whistle-stop tour we've taken you on over the course of the last 45 minutes has been useful. So please do use the next 15 minutes. If you have any questions, please fire them over to myself, and I'll do my very best to answer them.
Okay, so we've just actually had a question come through. What examples have you seen of companies driving a positive employee engagement score after collecting feedback?
Well, that's a good question. There's a number of examples of this, I think, but one of the best examples I've seen actually didn't cost a penny. So I think exactly the same situation. Employees will give feedback through employee engagement or satisfaction surveys, as long as they feel like they're being listened to and they feel like what they're saying could be used to drive the better or have an impact on the overall business. So certainly in my experience, when I've been trying to get contact center agent communities to try and fill these out, it's been painful. It's been really difficult. And I think a lot of that is because there hasn't been a process in place to be able to say, right, these are the things that you've told us. These are the ideas, the suggestions. These are the things that might have an impact on your level of engagement. These are the things that we can do about it. So one of the best examples I ever saw was with a utility business. And they didn't have a huge amount of money to spend. But what they did was they surveyed their frontline agents and they collected ideas, suggestions, gripes, issues, all those sorts of things. They collected it all and they created one big wall of post-it notes. The red post-it notes were the things that were very difficult to change. You know, we all understand that we can't just change our telephony system or we can't just change systems overnight. So they were demonstrating to the advisors that as much as they had made those comments about maybe a technological need or something that was big and heavy and hard to move, it was on the wall for all to see. Things like amber and things like the green comments were things that they could readily do things with. And by putting a nice big wall of post-it notes up and taking post-it notes down as and when things were achieved or done, created a really nice visible way of demonstrating to that agent population that change was happening and they were being listened to. Now, just by doing a simple exercise like that, the next time they ran an employee survey, the scores went through the roof, for one. The adoption rate in terms of the people that actually filled out the survey was the highest they'd ever seen. And I think a lot of that is down to the fact that they felt like they were being listened to. So in answer to your question, how do you drive a positive employee engagement score? I think you need to understand where you are in the first place, but then you've got to take action. One of the challenges with your kind of traditional HR surveys is the data comes out too late. The world has changed on its axis, and it's very difficult to drive any kind of change if you're getting that information at a later point. So the next question that has just come through: how do I move from a cherry-picked survey to a more automated approach? And will this have a big impact on IT time and effort? Yes, this is an age-old problem that we come across time and time again. The fact is, we all know that our IT teams are busy, and we all know that they are trying to deal with a whole raft of change programs that will fall in line with the business expected. In reality, to automate a survey process isn't very difficult at all. Really, all you need to make a survey accountable in real time is to be able to pull out a customer contact telephone number or email or something like that and be able to tag it back to an agent. So you really just need a customer CLI and an agent tag or reference code. Those are the two pieces of information. Now, most organizations can pull that out from their call recording system or their telephony system. Ideally, you want to be able to create an API or some kind of a real-time feed, but you may also want to consider creating a batch process of sending data to a provider. Anything like that would be better than creating a cherry-picked survey route. So we've got another question through. What are the key challenges in convincing people internally that more feedback will not only take more resource, but will give form of ROI down the line? So I think what we're taking from this question is, okay, I'm going to try and interpret this question. I think I know what we're trying to get at. So how do we convince people that more feedback will not take up more resource? Okay, so I'm going to spin this on its head slightly. From an agent and contact center and moment in time point of view, you really need to understand and work out what the thresholds are to be able to drive meaningful insight. So our recommendation for maybe a 200, 300, 400 seat contact center is to be collecting somewhere in the region of about 20 to 30 completed surveys per advisor per month. Now, the reason we suggest doing that is that is a statistically sound volume of surveys that will allow you to drive change, will allow you to have meaningful coaching interactions. Any more than that could be overkill and potentially could cost more money. So in that respect, I think it's important to work out what your thresholds are. Work out how many contacts you're having, whether it being phone, email, whatever that might be, and then work out what the statistically robust amount of data you need to be able to inform change. And that can be done internally, or it can be done by talking to a provider like Bright. But it's important to get that level of confidence to make sure that you're not overspending and providing overkill, but not making informed change based on too little amounts of data. Next question, can you share any examples of how large businesses have evidenced change with customers to build trust, to encourage survey responses? Okay, yes, I can, and it might sound a bit of a daft example, but it had a huge impact on that particular business. So it was one of the biggest housing associations in the country. So thousands upon thousands of customers living across their housing network. And one of the things that they did was they were asking for feedback after a repair interaction. So when customers have someone, a field repair person, come to their home to fix something, a highly emotive part of the journey, arguably far more emotive than when a customer speaks to someone on the phone, because you're letting someone in their home, and what that interaction looks and feels like is very difficult. So in this particular example, this organization was really trying to embed a culture where the repair teams or the field teams took ownership of the customer experience. They were no longer just perceiving themselves as asset managers. They really understood how impactful that interaction might be. And the feedback they were collecting, one of the key things that they took from that was, could we take greater care when operatives enter our home? So all they did was they went out and they bought those little plastic bag shoe covers, and they distributed it through their vast network of repair people and operatives. And from then on in, all repair people, when they entered the home, they had to pull these shoe holders on and off they go. They then distributed the fact they'd done that through a you said we did type mechanism through their monthly customer advocacy magazine. Well, the feedback went absolutely crazy, largely because it was such a small signifying thing that they'd done, but it really ticked the box in terms of showing that they'd listened and showing that they were making incremental changes and putting themselves in the shoes of the customer, excuse the pun, and actually taking what customers had said and making evolutions to their business on that basis. So yes, that is one of the examples of people who've done. There's lots and lots of examples, probably too many to mention now, but I will, if anyone wants to talk offline, I'm more than happy to try and bring some of those scenarios to life. Just the final question. Do different companies use different metrics to calculate their NPS score? Yes, they do. I've seen all sorts of different ways of organisations measuring NPS. We will distribute to those people that attended the white paper that we've written on this topic with the definitive way of measuring Net Promoter, how it was set out in the first place. I'm not saying that people are wrong measuring in different ways. The point is that if you're measuring in a way that is different to how the wider contact center community measures, then it's very difficult to benchmark and actually assess how you're stacking up against others. The other point is that the same piece remains. If you're trying to drive positive change and you're using an NPS score and just chasing that score in its own right and not actually looking at what value that's delivering both from a customer and business point of view, is very difficult and very meaningless. So the measurement process is less important, I think. It's what you're trying to do with the kind of change momentum you're building that's far more important. I think we have reached the end of the webinar now. We do have lots of information online about the Net Promoter and ways of improving this. We will distribute the white paper, as I mentioned, on this theme. My contact details are on the screen now. I'd be delighted to have a conversation with anyone that would like to maybe take this offline and pick our brains about some of the work we might have done, or maybe help or assistance that we could offer. There's lots of extra reading on www.brightindex.co.uk, but for now, may I say a big thank you to everyone that has taken the time to join us this morning. I really do hope it's been useful. We will be doing more webinars in the future, and please do feel free to get in touch at any point if you have any further questions or would like to discuss. Many thanks again. Goodbye.